Right on. I'd like to welcome everybody to Big Book Study Workshop with a program of recovery. I am an alcoholic, and my name's Tony. I recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body through the connection I formulated through the course of action in our big book, my sobriety date's April 8, 1989. It wasn't my first introduction to AA, but it was my first introduction to the program of recovery as outlined in our basic text. And as the result of this course of action, I've been sober ever since, and I've never met anybody who's ever gone through this, the way it's outlined, maintained it, who's ever relapsed, including myself. I was a chronic relapser. My last relapse was in 1987, just before I got... that even sounds weird saying that, 1987. That's a long time ago. I always go, wait a minute, is that date correct? Like, may not impress you, but it sure impresses the shit out of me, man. Because it's like a miracle for me to be even here in the condition I'm in, never mind still alive. But anyhow, April 8, 1989 is when I got sober, right? And so my last introduction to this thing, I spent 360 meetings in 90 days and I ended up relapsing an hour after the noon meeting, and I won't get into that. But that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about, last week we talked in great detail about step 2, and we're going to hit a couple highlights about that, but mostly we're going to talk about the course of action that they talked about and how it works as the solution to the problem as they outlined in step 1. And on 59, they talked about here, last week we looked at the outlay of what they were talking about when they admitted that they were powerless over alcohol, that their lives had become unmanageable. We understood that through that they were talking in past tense, right? And so if you're new to us, you'd be talking in present tense. Right? And that's why when they're talking in past tense, that means fundamentally they've actually found a solution, and that's what they're talking about. That's the whole point of this thing, right? Is they talked about, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. That means they already took them, right? And so if I didn't want to experience what they're talking about, I need to take that same course of action. And that's what the previous portion of the book is all about. It prepares me to get me to a place of making a decision. And if you've just been involved in the fellowship or treatment centers or other people's idea of this thing, it could be quite confusing. Anybody contest to that? How many people got a lot of, you come into a meeting, how many people came into a meeting and you thought there was a slogan that said, figure it out, right? Come on. How many people sat there and tried to figure this thing out? They're reading how it works, and you're trying to figure out how it works, and they're reading it, right? And you wonder what this is all about, and they read the preamble, right? But you're too busy thinking. You're talking to the most important person in the room, yourself. Some of you are doing that now, right? And so that's a part of the problem, right? And that's the first obsession that they talk about that we need to smash is ourselves. And it may be hard to kind of imagine being kind of new that there's something more important than you, but that's the idea, right? And so when they talked about this, there's 2 obsessions that they talk about. And neither one of them, and they precede kind of step 1, right? And so what they talk about, what we're going to look at here tonight is step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So we know what they mean by that sanity because we understand the insanity that they talked about in step 1. Is that correct? So a lot of people think the obsession is what they're talking about. They're not. That's not the insanity they're talking about. The insanity they're talking about is connected to the malady on page 23 and not the spiritual malady. Because a lot of people, as soon as they say malady, they think spiritual malady. How many people are of that thinking? So they use different words to describe different things in our book. I don't know if anybody's noticed that. Even though they use the same words like using the or this, right? Like malady, they use the word malady a couple times. And the first time they actually start associating this malady, this condition, it centers where? In the mind. And so when you understand that this is what places us beyond human aid that we got into in great detail last week, that if you're of this type What type is that? Of the type of being a real alcoholic, right? So what makes us a real alcoholic, right, is this condition that centers in the mind that places us beyond human aid. And so what is this thing that they talk about? Well, they clarify it on page 37, and we've gotten into this in great detail last week, and we got into a bit, but we're going to get the summary of this thing on page 23, so we kind of know what's this thing on page 23 is this condition that centers in the mind, right? They call it, once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. Why are they baffled? Katie?
Because they can't stop. They can't stay stopped.
That's right. Because if you could stay stopped, would you have need to seek any other solution? So staying stopped means not starting again, right, Kimball? So, including weekends, holidays, and birthdays. I like it. You can tell where our fellowship has gone to, right? Where they say, I have continuous sobriety. Well, uninterrupted. Well, if it was interrupted, it wouldn't be continuous, would it? And anyway, I'm not even going to go there. When we have to explain uninterrupted, we're dealing with a special group of people, right? Oh, you mean weekends are included in that? Yes, weekends are included in that. You don't get to celebrate on your birthday once a year. So, this malady where they started, because we already agreed on page 22 that if I never took a drink again, I'd never trigger the allergy. Remember when we went through Bill's story? He kind of knew that. He was one of the founders of AA. He knew he could not take so much as one drink. Did that stop him from drinking? Did he want to drink? No. So that was kind of like this. And so when they talk about this malady, like the allergy, they used a lot of different terminology to explain it and to expand on it, right? So on page 23, they're expanding from the first idea presented in the doctor's opinion as this thing that happens in the mind. He called it a desire back then. But as they started going through the book, they said, now I got your attention about the allergy, right? Now we're going to talk about what the main problem of the alcoholic is, right? And a lot of people think it's the spiritual malady, but that has nothing to do with alcoholism. That has nothing to do with step one, right? Because a lot of people have the spiritual malady who are not alcoholics. How many people find that surprising? So a lot of people get taught in a fellowship that the spiritual malady is what makes us alcoholic. No, it is not. Otherwise, it would be in one of the symptoms that they describe on page 24 in diagnosing yourself, whether you have this illness or not, wouldn't it? So that's why they talk about. So here we're going to look on page 37 is this thing, and it's very important that it's not trying to get you to understand something, it's trying to explain something to you that's really hard to explain, right? So what's the synopsis here? You may think, page 30.
An alcoholic, middle of the page, second paragraph, it says, you may think this an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched. For this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us.
Okay, so hold it. So you noticed it didn't say some of us? It said every single one of us. So it's a collective experience. What's this collective experience that they're talking about? So they talked about here on page 3, how shall we help the reader to determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? And what determines whether you're one of us or not is, here's the second question, is whether you can keep yourself sober based on your own experience, right? And a lot of people can stay sober based on smashing the idea, the obsession that they can control and enjoy their drinking, or given good reason, they can stop for long periods of time. The jury's not out yet, right? The idea of, I got to go the rest of my life, so I need to find a solution sufficient of this type. So they talk about here of this guy putting an ounce of whiskey in his milk. As an observer to the story, you may think that's crazy, but when you look back on your own relapses, how many people's relapsed here? In light of what's happened to you, isn't it crazy when you look at that moment just before you picked up that there was nothing you could have done to change it?
Yep.
If you think there's something that you could have done to change it, like phone somebody or pray, or there's something within your own resources or power that you could have done, then you haven't done step one yet.
Yeah.
Right? if you look back on that situation and realize there was nothing you could have done to change that experience, then you're understanding alcoholism. Because this thing, as they start to talk about it here, they're saying this is the characteristics of it. This is what it looks like for people who have it. It doesn't say, do you understand it? Because they're going to explain something here that nowhere does anybody understand this thing. And if someone's trying to tell you they understand it, then they're really saying they don't understand it. Right? Okay, go ahead. Here's the best way they explain it.
We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that ran that parallel with our sound reasoning.
An unexplainable event that happens in your mind. Anybody have that unexplainable event that runs parallel with your... Yeah. So that means this thing, this illness that's separate from you, that is within you, that it kind of takes over. When it takes over, you don't know it's happening. And you may have a vague idea that it's happening. Anybody here is thinking I shouldn't be doing this and do it anyways? Mm-hmm. How many people is here is taking a drink and then afterwards saying, oh my God, I'm not supposed to be doing this? Why didn't your brain tell you that beforehand? Because there's, I call it a hostile takeover.
Yeah.
Like something happened with inside of me where I wasn't able to use reason with. Well, that's kind of weird because with the obsession, I could use reason with. They say I could smash the idea of safely drinking. That's the first step in recovery. So the obsession I could smash. This phenomena, this thing that happens in my brain is beyond my ability to conquer. That's why they never use the word obsession again in our textbook. They use it in association with people who haven't done step one yet. If you're still obsessing about drinking, then you haven't done step one yet, have you? No. Right? So here they're talking about, like in Bill's story, and all the people that went through this who are of this type is they keep drinking against their own will when they don't want to drink and they don't know why they do it. And they're saying because it's a phenomenon. It's an unexplainable event that happens in people like us. Okay, so if it's beyond my ability to fix, change, or alter, then does that mean I'm in trouble?
Yeah.
Does that mean I'm in a collision course with another drink?
Yep.
And I'm the only one that don't know when it's going to happen? That's the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is designed for relapsers. How many people find that surprising? People give you the impression that AA was designed for people who can stay sober. Anybody here? So you'd feel bad after relapsing. But it's actually designed for people who can't stay sober. Oh my God, really? Yes. That's why one of our best slogans is, welcome back. No. Because we already know you're going out. Well, we'll get into that later. Okay, go ahead. Phenomena. There
was always the curious mental phenomenon.
Always. Not now and then, always. For all of us. It's a collective experience. It's no longer singular. Notice that? It's not, well, for me. It's for us, for people like us. Right? Yes, no?
Totally.
It's not step one as I understand it. Whose understanding am I formulating here or coming into agreements with? Is theirs? Yes or no?
Yes.
So I'm starting to understand what they understand and what they experience, and I also experience. So it's formulating the same terminology that's based in this book, which is the fundamental language of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our terminology is based on this, laid out by the first 100 men and women. So we're adopting this terminology when working with new people. So we have our own language within our fellowship. That when we hear it, it clues into the fact that either somebody hasn't had this or has had it, have done the same thing or hasn't done the same thing. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the only one that don't know it is those who haven't done it yet because you still think you're sounding like everybody else. I've been there 11 years. Anybody been there? Yeah, I've done this. Here's your chip. We know you have. Here's your 24-hour chip again. How do you know I had it? Well, anyways, go ahead.
That parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. This insane idea won out.
Right?
Next
So,
state.
so when we get to page 44, we see that a couple things happen here, and most people miss it. That's where, like, I think what I see happening in our fellowship is the biggest problem that we have isn't newcomers. It's poor sponsorship. Mm-hmm. Because if you haven't been sponsored through this course of action, or your sponsor hasn't been, right, taken through this course of action, so how can they take you through this course of action? And we can make bullshit sound really good, right? Anybody here? We could really, we could make bullshit sound really good. We believe half of our shit and then we sell
Eskimo.
it. Yeah, right? And so now we're sponsoring people based on what we think and our feelings or emotions or shit that we got taught that's not book-based at all. And then they start sponsoring, and pretty soon we're moving away from the message in the book, right? So, like what we have one of those series on our talks there about what is good sponsorship. And good sponsorship is they're using the book like we are. So what we are doing is guiding you through the book, right? To point out the highlights and the language of it and the purpose of it. So really, who's really sponsoring you, is weird as this may seem, is the first 100 men and women, because we're looking at their experience. And I'm talking about my experience with this also. Right, so we're using this as a basic text. So really, our lineage is to the first 100 men and women, and since thousands. So how did we all have the same experience by doing the same thing? Does that kind of make sense? So I need to learn the same terminology as they did. So I've learned the same terminology in regards to alcoholism and how many symptoms there are in it. There are 2 symptoms in alcoholism. According to who? According to them who put this thing together. So on page 44, we see the purpose of the book up to this point. But it's also prepared us for the second part of this thing. Right? So all the way along here, you hear people say, oh, the first portion of the book only deal with step 1. Then you're not reading the book. Because all the way through this text, it's been preparing you with the problem and the solution and examples of it and conversations of it on step 1 and step 2. All the way through it, right? So what's the first part here on page 44? What is the summary of the conclusion of the purpose of us going through this with hopefully a sponsor or a guide or even alone? Because you should be able to actually get through this and pick up on the same information they have if you went through this alone. Maybe not as equipped, right? But you should gather the same information if you're using the same book. Yes or no? Yep. Meaning if I went to a toy store and I bought a model of a car that I really enjoyed and I brought it home, there would be an instruction manual with it. Anybody remember that? You open it up, there's an instruction manual. We put it aside because we're smart. And then by the time we finish it, we realize it doesn't look like the picture at all, does it? And then we're the only ones that complain about it. We get pissed off that it doesn't look like the thing, but we didn't use the instructions. And that's like our sobriety. We get pissed, hey, it doesn't work. Did you use the instructions? Did you follow the manual? Well, I own a book. I said to the new guy, hey, do you have a big book? He says, yeah, of course I have a big book. I said, do you know where it is? He said, no. So that's kind of like us, right? Do you have a big book? Yeah, I have a big book. Do you read it? Well, no. Holds my coffee. How many people been there? How many people said, yeah, I got a big book like Indignant, but have you read it? No, 2 different things, right? So here's the highlight of the purpose of the book. This book, when it asks you a question, it answers it. It doesn't really expect you to answer it, does it? The question marks is saying, hey, I know this is a question, but we'll answer it for you because we don't want you answering it. Why don't we want you answering it? Because you'll just start bullshitting. Right? Come on, how many people went through the course of action and realized how full of shit they actually were after they did the course of action? How many people, when they got here, thought honesty was the most important quality they had? Then you know, coupled with a little bit of self-delusion. But anyways, first paragraph, page 44.
Okay, it says, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic.
So fundamentally, it's not technically, they've kind of summarized 4 questions for you to answer to yourself. There's a word for it. People say, well, I don't see no question mark there. But it's the summary or conclusion. I forgot, my wife taught me the name. She has her master's in English. But it's like a summary or conclusion, right? So I went through this thing. Like I come from the streets of Toronto. I'm not very my education's book-based and from other people, right? So you got to excuse my kind of approach to this sometimes. Bear with me. But here where they're saying, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. To me, that's yes or no. Have I or haven't I? Yes, no, summary? We agree? Have you or haven't you? And if you haven't, that means you need to go back through this again, right? Then we hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Have they done that? And if I don't know what that is, then that means I need to go back through the book again, don't I? Yes, no? That means I missed something. That means how can I go further if I haven't got the groundwork down to where I am so far, because I'm moving into multiplication. That's like a math book. If I don't know how the basis of the numbers work, how would I go into multiplication, right? So then it asked me the first question. If you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, which is the malady as described on page 23. And it's not the spiritual malady, it's the malady that centers in the mind, an unexplainable event as explained on page 37. It's a phenomena. How do you explain a phenomena? This is what it looks like, or the characteristics of it for people who suffer from it. How should we help our reader to determine whether they're one of us to their own satisfaction? Well, this is what it looks like to be one of us, right? And the one thing is that we can't stay sober, including weekends, holidays, and regardless. Given good reason. Anybody here had good reason to stay sober?
Yep.
And drank again? How many people drank after periods of sobriety? So we see what causes is this thing, this phenomenon, unexplainable event that we can't see, feel, and touch. Because what we want to do is we want to see, feel, and touch it. Because if we can see, feel, and touch it, then I'll apply the steps to it when it's happening.
Right.
As long as I can keep me sober by not taking the first drink, that means I'm not, then step 1 doesn't apply to me, does it? So here they're saying, and then the second question is, when drinking, can I control the amounts I drink? And then they get down here. So they talk about, if that be the case, how many questions have they asked me in regards to alcoholism itself? 2. They prepared me for it through the same understanding they have. And now I'm qualifying myself for the first time. So what I'm doing on this page is what they did on page 30. What did they do on page 30 is most of us have been unwilling to admit we're real alcoholics. No person thinks they're bodily, mentally different than their fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. Right? The illusion, right? The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. I'm paraphrasing. I think I'm getting it kind of right here, right? So the idea has to be smashed. What? The conceding that I have this allergy that I can never safely drink, or I can never really ever drink with the idea of impunity or without consequence. Why? Because if you can't control the amount you drink, you can't control the outcome. That's why they said we learned. Who learned? They learned. We learned that we fully had to concede to our innermost self. To concede means not surrender, not accept, not admit. Concede means to look at what's being presented. Do you concur? What we're doing here is what we're doing on page 44 is what they talked about on page 30. So I'm conceding that if I have this condition, I'm in trouble. Yes or no?
Yes. That
That means I'm going to drink again. It's just a matter of when, not if. That's the step one promise, isn't it? That I'm going to drink again. I'm admitting that here. And if you really admit that, then you're like the other guy in the book. You should have that impending doom feeling inside. Right? That's the conceding that, oh my God, I'm in trouble. I'm in deep shit. They're saying, okay, relax here. We could tell you this because we have a solution for you. So let's start explaining it. This is where we start losing a lot of people, right? Nobody likes to think they're bodily and mentally different. No person likes to think they're a real alcoholic. What classifies us as a real alcoholic is the ones who are beyond human aid. Is that everybody in our fellowship? No. But everybody who's been through this book, because some people see the light, other people feel the fire. We're more the fire kind of people. We're motivated by the flame. And then after a while, maybe a bit of the light, but it's mostly by the flame, right? Anybody here? How many people here motivated by the... No, we're motivated by the flame because the alternative is I'm going to drink and die again. Anybody? So what's been my greatest persuader is alcohol. Okay, so here we go. And now they're going to break it down. Here goes to the bottom line here, okay? Go ahead.
If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer.
So have they been talking about a spiritual experience all along in a roundabout way? They started the introduction of that conversation where? The first page without even realizing it. As soon as you get this book, it's solution-oriented. You're hoping that there's a solution available to you if you're conflicted with this problem. So without even realizing it, you've made a decision to pursue something, to look for an answer to something that you quite don't understand. Does that kind of make sense? You see how you've already started these ideas. Now they're breaking them down to their simplest fact. So here's the problem. Now let's kind of really start looking at the solution here, right? And the spiritual solution where they talk about this psychic change, go ahead, the spiritual experience will conquer. You may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Mm-hmm. Right? We understand what they mean that because we've had examples of that so far in the book, haven't we?
Yeah.
Have we read the spiritual appendix in the back of the book?
Yeah.
Has it asked us to do that a couple times now?
Yeah.
So it's prepared us for the beginning of the pursuit of the solution. Has it not? Yeah. But so there might be some misgiving. So where we're at with this thing is the same place Bill was. See, and have they asked you to choose your own conception of what the solution means yet?
No.
We get people that are new in the rooms saying, choose your own conception. Nowhere does it tell you to do that. People are starting to argue. Nowhere does it tell a new person to do that. How many people are arguing a bit there? How many people are arguing a bit? Come on. I seen some of your faces. Because we tell people that, choose your own conception. Of what? What are they gonna... Of what? Of their own understanding? Their own understanding is gonna get them drunk still. Their own understanding? Their own understanding is what they're trying to run from. Right? So we'll read that again. Right? If that be the case...
If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer.
Keep going.
To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible.
See, which is weird is because the true believer thinks they can have it. They already have it just by their belief system. See, with the problem is all three of these people are having the same problem. What's the same problem is they don't have a solution to their problem. Right? Here, come on, you want them? So all of them, my dog. So all of them think, right? So the true believer thinks, I could bypass this whole thing and go right to God. How many people has tried that here? I don't need to do the rest of this because I already have a relationship with God. Well, why are you getting loaded all the time? Well, it must be God's will because nothing happens in God's world by mistake. Oh my God. You come sit beside me at the next meeting. We'll go through this slowly, okay? Okay, go ahead, keep reading.
When he feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster.
Okay, such an experience as what? Spiritual spirit or psychic change. What they talked about in the back of the book. The spiritual appendix. This change. This thing that the doctor talked about on page, when they talked about this phenomena. What other phenomena are they talking about here, right? They're talking about a different phenomena that is quite interesting when you kind of look at it, and more about alcoholism. They talk about, there is a solution. They talk about this phenomenon that the doctor talked about. How many people remember these things? On page 27, they talked about this guy who was also a church guy, and he tried to explain this thing that needs to happen with us, that we all try to find understanding with. Right? How many people really try to figure this out all the time? Come on. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to figure God out, figure this out, figure that out. We already told you we don't really understand how this shit happens, but this is how it looks like when it does happen, which is step one. Like, you hear people say, oh, the allergy. The way they explained it back then was an abnormal reaction. They have to explain it in a way where it made sense to people who were afflicted with it. I'm not getting in there, well, it's not actually. Yeah, it's an abnormal reaction than most people when the time it was written. Right? And so when they talked about this condition of the mind, they had to explain it in a way that made sense. I talked to my wife about this stuff, and it doesn't make sense to her. How I could go to a hospital, get stabbed, I ended up in the hospital for the long weekend, and all I want them to do is sew me up so I can hit the liquor store because it's the long weekend. And like she thinks that makes perfectly good sense to me because it's the long weekend. Anybody with me on that one? So yeah. Like we don't think or act like other people. So she says, and then you took another. Yeah. Anyways, we already went through that. So this solution, everybody tries to figure out is this is the best way it's kind of explained is on page 27, and the doctor said, let's back up here, and this is. They've covered this in great detail when we go back, and this is kind of like the guy on page 42 who doesn't really do step one, but he admits that they have a problem. There's a lot of people in the fellowship who admit they have a problem, but have never really done step one. See, the guy on page 40 admits he has a problem, but he doesn't actually do step one until he gets to page 42. And that's like most of us. How many people has come in the fellowship admit they have a problem and think that's doing step one? Two different things altogether. By the time this guy actually does step one, he's prepared for step two. If you actually do a step one the way it's outlined here and the way they outlined it and designed it, you'll be really seeking a solution to this thing. So here we go. So on page 27, they're talking about this solution, and they're talking about a lot of our readers, and some of our readers may, I like this, some of our readers on page 27, go ahead.
Okay, some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help.
You notice how they said alcoholic, right?
Yeah.
You'll find that funny later. Maybe not right now. But later on when you're explaining it to somebody else, you'll laugh like I just laughed. But I didn't find it funny when they read it to me either the first time, right? Okay, go ahead.
Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic.
So what is that? It's page 23. Mm-hmm. This malady that centers in the mind. You can't really explain it, but this is what it looks like. That's why they call it a malady. They don't really pinpoint it because it's this condition that they don't really know how to explain. That happens for people like us. This is what it looks like when it happens. Right? It's a phenomenon. It's a malady. It's just, like when you look up the word malady, there's a lot of different things in it. We like to cherry pick things. What it is an overall saying, It's a whole bunch of things that make this thing up. And we really don't know how to kind of explain it, but this is what it looks like. Kind of weird, right? So normal people, when they hear us explain step one, they go, oh, that sounds crazy. When we talk to each other about it, we go, yeah, me too. We started that Me Too movement way before anybody else did. Me too. You mean you were going to go to a kid's party and everything was good, and you, instead of picking up a present, you picked up a 40 and you crashed at McDonald's kids party with your friends? Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. Like shit, like me too. You had all the intentions of going to your cousin's wedding sober, loaded. Me too. After 3 drinks, you're not related to anybody. Yeah, me too. So, some of you are getting what I'm saying. Okay, go ahead. So now they're talking about the same idea with the solution. They're saying, hey, and he's going to explain it the best way possible in the best terminology to explain this thing that we need to acquire, which is kind of weird because we don't really know how to explain it, but this is our experience with it, this is how we got it, and this is what it looks like when you have it. Can you explain it? It's hard to explain. I really don't know how to explain it. But once you experience it, no further explanation is necessary. But before you explain it, you go, what? Well, it's kind of like the first time you felt the magic in a drink. Did you need to explain after that? No, right? You just pursued. And that's like our solution. Once you experience a bit, then no further explanation is necessary. Our job is to get you from a place of, what the hell are you talking about, to, wow, this is not bad. Holy shit, that must actually work. Holy smokes, I'm getting some relief here. This is not bad. And just it's like, how many people remember that Christmas special where the guy gets visited from ghosts from the past, and he's a miserable prick before going through this. Like, a lot of people still are just miserable as hell. Anybody, if you want what I got, it's okay. Let me step back a bit before I get any on me. I might step in that. Come on, how many people been there? Come on. But we're not judgmental group. Anyways, I don't got time to get into that. So the guy has an experience. It's hard to explain, but after that he freaked everybody out. Like he was giddy. Anybody remember that transformation that happened within a series of events? And that's kind of like what we're going to talk about. But if he had to explain that, it would be like, the more he explained it, the more crazy he would sound, wouldn't he? Yeah. Well, I had these people visit me from my past, and I had this psychic moment and realization, blah, blah, and then I seen something happen inside of me that created this total change with the possibility of living a life beyond anything I could imagine. Wow. Okay. Remember that lady who was trying to get away from him on the staircase? Because that's what it really looks like for people. But when people start witnessing it, they're going, wow, there's something here. There's really something happened to this person. And that's the same thing that happened with Dr. Silkworth watched Bill. That was the same thing when Bill seen Ebby. There was something unexplainable there. It was so profound, that experience that Bill had with his friend sitting at the kitchen table, that it revised his understanding of miracles right there. Because it was something beyond the ability to explain. Even though his friend sat with him for hours. It wasn't a 2-minute conversation. What was he sitting there talking to him for hours about was his experience that he had through a course of action, that he came to pass on to his friend. So Ebby, what we understand now, would be a 12-step call, passing on to Bill the solution, which would be step 2, which somebody passed on to Ebby at a period of time. So the confirmation of step 2 is step 12. Right? And then we carry this message. So on page 25 here, page 37, he's talking about this thing. Go ahead.
37?
Page 27.
27. Okay. It's the doctor said you have a mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you.
So the malady beyond human aid. Go ahead.
Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang.
Step one. Because if you're gonna, you ever see? I just did step one. I feel so great. God, can I do your step one? Because I just did step one, and my sphincter's just puckered a bit, right? So like, I'm in trouble here. Okay, go ahead. Did I just say that out loud? I'm sorry. Sometimes I get out there. Okay.
Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate
So
them."
has this doctor experienced this, or is he describing it as something that he knows to be true that's happened for other people? He's describing, he says, I've seen these things happen, or I've heard about them, right? To me, these occurrences are phenomenal, but they've been happening since the beginning of time. And they've been happening for people like you, who usually die, or people that are beyond his scope. Remember they talked about that in the doctor's opinion? That the doctor could reach a lot of these people that came to his facility, but a lot of them that were beyond his scope to reach. The application of what he was doing wasn't able to curb or change their lives. Bill was one of those people. Bill acquired some information that he put into practice the third time he went into treatment. Right? And the doctor witnessed these things. And what the difference the third time was, is that Ebby was taking him through the same course of action that he went through. Right? And you notice that when Bill had this thing, he didn't go with his own idea of a power greater than himself. He said he always believed in the power, and if he would have went with that idea, we wouldn't have Alcoholics Anonymous today. What we have is Ebby talked to him about his experience for hours. And he talked about the course of action he did that people presented to him. Right? And through that conversation, the most tangible part of that was Bill witnessed that there was a miracle sitting across the table from him. His ideas were revised right then and there. Right? So he was a place from hopeless condition to seeing the possibility of hope. Right? He didn't say he understood this thing. Right? Because he sat there, he says, he was kind of confused about it because he said, well, here it sat across this miracle, but he had no more power in him than I did. So he was confused about what was happening here, but he was inwardly rearranged. So Bill was kind of saying, there's something happening here. And so he didn't quite fully understand it. But what he did get to a point was, in his story, that a lot of people miss, that it's our job, your job, is to get to this place, is where he's sitting at the kitchen table. Right? And he's sitting at the kitchen table doing what? He's pondering everything that he just talked about, right? And his friend sees that he's struggling with this. And because before that, he talks about here, and this is what we agnostics are for. If you're struggling with the idea of what's being presented here, you need to understand it better. And it's more time than we have to get into right now. It's your job to read through We Agnostics. Will get you to a place where Bill is here. And that's the idea that there is a solution available to me if I care to have it and go through it. I don't have to understand it, but do I believe that there is something? The wording of it is quite optional. But do I believe if I did the same course of action that these people that went before me did, or I did the same course of action that's outlined in here, I'll get the same thing that they have. And what's that? That's the miracle or the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. Can I have this story in my life? Because we don't offer you your story. What we do is offer you our story, if you want what we have. And it's collective, it's not singular. All our members have tapped into an inner resource of strength, not some of our members. It's our understanding. What's our understanding is we get access to a power greater than ourselves. And so we agnostics kind of set up from page 45 on is what Bill goes through here. Page 12, despite, because we're thinkers and we talk ourselves out of happiness on a continuous basis. That's why it doesn't ask you what you think. It asks you, do you understand? Do you get the basis of this? Do you get the fundamentals of what's being said here and offered here? Nowhere did it say come up with your own idea about our solution. We started, I don't know where that started. I think it started from a treatment center. The guy hasn't even done step 1 yet. And all of a sudden we're telling him, choose your own conception of God. Well, for what? You don't even know what we're applying it to or the basis of our solution or the need of having this thing. So you're getting into the ideas and the philosophies again, and without realizing it, you're getting into a behavioral-oriented approach. You're getting into your idea of what the solution is. You don't understand our idea. So what you need to understand before you can move forward is what's our idea, our solution as we understand here. You hear people argue this, and whatever. But when it says God as we understand him, they're talking about collectively. They're not talking singularly. Yeah. In step 3, as we understood him, means we understand collectively that we all agree on what the solution is. And in step 11, we all experience the same thing. It's not singular. If you've carefully followed directions, you'll be experiencing what we've experienced. If you've done it your way, thinking this is Burger King sobriety, drive-through, I have a bit of, hit the checkout window, I have a side order of fries with a bit of acceptance and maybe a 90 meetings in 90 days, trial run, then don't complain with what you get. Right? But here's Bill, this is what we all go through. Not some of us, all of us. Page 12.
Page 12.
Despite. Yeah, despite. People arguing right now. Anybody arguing a bit? Come on. 3 people left. Went to talk to their sponsor about how wrong we are. I know, they're using the book. I've never read that before. Okay. They're just using the book. Well, what's the matter with it? Aren't they supposed to interpret it, what it says? Okay. No? Okay, go ahead.
Despite the living example. Start there.
Yeah, isn't that it? We get people. How many times? Come on, Katie. How many times I said, "Hey, this really works. Why don't you try this?" You guys are crazy. I don't see how that's going to work. Never asked you, do you see how it works? Do you see that it does work?
But
we think that's a question. Do you understand how this works, or do you see how it works? No. Do you see that it works in my life? Do I believe it will work in your life? Not that I understand. Oh, yeah, of course, it makes perfectly good sense to me, says nobody. Okay, go ahead. Right, Kimball? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestige of old prejudice.
Your own thinking. You stuck on you.
Sympathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified.
So wait a minute. How good is Bill going to go with his own conception of God here? No. Right? He's going with his own understanding here. He's not going to be very successful, is he? He's pissed off and he hasn't even started yet. Wait a minute. He's talked himself. He's going to die an alcoholic death, but he's having a problem with his thinking. Going past his thinking. You notice he's having problems here, is he not? How many people had problems with their idea what step 2 meant, or their idea of with their ideas general? How many people struggle with your own ideas in general? How many people start off with a good conversation only to finish arguing with yourself, thinking you're arguing with people who are not even in the room? How many people here, most of their conversations end up with them swearing at themselves? It's not good, right? Right? And come on. We're not good thinkers, are we? Untreated, right? You just, okay.
This feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of the czar of the heavens, however loving his sway may be. I've since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God?
So, is this before or after he talked to him about his experience? After. He talks about here that he talked on page 10 that Ebby talked to him for hours about his experience. He just didn't say choose your own conception. And Bill was able to see the demonstration of this thing working in his life. He couldn't argue that. He couldn't argue those points. And he also talked about his ideas of miracles were revised right then and there. So he has his own conception, past, and he's choosing a new one based on what's being presented, which is the solution to his problem. Because Ebby came to pass that on. That's what the book does. Book comes to pass on their solution to the dilemma that you're suffering from. So the more I understand what they're talking about, the easier I'll be able to go through this. Would I not? For those who have been through it, is that not correct? Because if you were to stay with your own thinking, how many people couldn't get past that stumbling blocks within themselves? That's where they're saying, if you're stumbling with this thing, then you don't understand what we're talking about. Let's look at it again. Let's not go with your understanding. To choose your own conception means you understand what's being presented. Is after a conception of what? Of what's being talked about. So when we talk about the solution that's being presented here as a course of action that enables me to tap into a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem, well, where and how do I find this power as described on page 45? That's exactly what this book is about. So my willingness to just go through this course of action to do what is presented, then I'll have the experience as the result of this course of action, not as the result of thinking about it. So here's where Bill's talking about choose your own conception of what? What's being presented. So let's see what he does with that. Go ahead.
That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make the beginning.
Ready? The basis of step 2 is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Most people start talking about their relationship with God in step 2. That's not what step 2 is about. Step 2 is the solution to step 1. Step 1 is the problem as they see it. Step 2 is the solution as they formulate it based on their experience. Step 2 is the course of action as laid out from step 3 to 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Where do I get this understanding of this change that I need to acquire is in step 2. Where's the basis of that understanding? It starts from the beginning of the book to gets me to the end of We Agnostics. Then I'll have all the information I need to make a decision whether I want to pursue this solution or not. So Bill has all that same information. Now, he understands what the problem is, he understands what the solution is, he understands the course of action that his friend took because his friend came and talked to him about this change that happened that was presented to him from some other people, right? So he sees this lineage starting to happen here, which is an experience through a course of action, right? That's what's being presented here. So Bill sees that it's only a matter of being willing to believe. Nothing more was required. Willing to believe what? That there is a power greater than him. And in We Agnostics, it's talking even a willingness to be willing. So this week, when you go through, if you're struggling a bit with your understanding, then you don't understand what we're talking about. So first find out what we're talking about in regards to step 2 and this solution that's being presented. Then choose your own conception of our presentation of the solution. Does that kind of make sense? But in order for you to choose your own conception, you need to understand what we're talking about. Our understanding, not yours. It's our solution, not yours. It's not your solution as you understand it. It's not going to work. Because if it worked, it'd be 2 pages. Just don't drink and come up with your own solution. How many people try to come up with their own solution here? Huh? And then you're reading a pink piece of paper. I did that, and I did that, and I did that. I got court when? Being convinced. Okay, so go ahead. So we see this here. It was only a matter, that's worth reading again, squiggly writing.
Okay, it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning.
To make my beginning. To what? Mm-hmm. So they qualify that. To make my beginning of what? Go ahead. I saw
that growth could start from that point, upon a foundation of complete willingness. I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it?
Okay, hold it. I might build what I saw in my friend. So in order to him have the same experience that his friend was having across the table for him that he came to pass on, he had to do the same thing, yes or no? Mm-hmm. So we've expanded that so it's more palatable into 12 steps. Right? And we moved a little more away from the Oxford group with certain terminologies and ideas that were presented back then, so it would be more inclusive than exclusive. I believe this book is divinely put together. It's put together in such a way that even a guy like me was able to experience what was presented here, because my own understanding was killing me. But when I understood what their understanding, it changed everything. Because I come from a background, Nazarene, Pentecostal background. And I don't got enough time to get into the stuff that was happening. But my own understanding were creating stumbling blocks with me getting this thing. And I was dying before I even experienced it. I couldn't get past my own thinking. And that's the same with Bill here. But Bill came to a place of, I was only a matter of willing to believe, right, in a power. Am I willing to believe? Yes, I see it happening in other people, the examples of this thing. And what does he do with that? So, upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. So he's done step 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. What was his decision?
Would I have it? Of course I would.
So we see he does steps 1, 2, and 3. Sitting at the kitchen table drinking. There's nothing major going on in his life. He hasn't got this major bottom catastrophe, house on fire. He's sitting there dying of alcoholism. He's been without a solution thus far. His experiences, get sober, drink. Get sober, drink. We see that all the elements in the second time he ended up in treatment would be enough to get a person who wasn't afflicted with this illness sober. Yeah. Based on the gift of desperation, the gift of hitting bottom, acceptance, surrender. We see all those things happen in the second time in treatment. Yes or no? How many people been there? Right? And he leaves treatment and drinks again. It's tragic, but I identify with it. Everybody around me passing lie detectors test, never doing it again. Anybody there? And then I do it again. Just baffled. Right? Mm-hmm. So, we see that has anything changed. But now he knows what the problem is, he knows what the solution is, and he knows he needs to do a course of action. And we seen on page 13, where he confirms his decision by moving forward. Right? Where he was separated from alcohol for the last time. That's the confirmation of his third step decision on page 12. Because where did he make a decision to want this thing, which we understand is step 3, yes or no? Is at the kitchen table. What confirmed it was him taking certain actions to bring this thing about. Then we see that in this thing here. So when we kind of look at this guy, we'll go back to this guy, which is most people in our fellowship. And that's okay, right? Because our problem is our thinking and our understanding and the changing of things in our fellowship. And it's so subtle how it changes that most of it can't be based on the book anymore. Mm-hmm. And then when challenged, people go, it means the same thing. It doesn't mean the same thing. The more you understand this book, the more you'll realize that this was put together to actually participate in the saving of our lives. If they wanted something to mean this, they would have said it meant that. They're very specific on the outline of it. What happens is irresponsible members or people who don't understand themselves pass on somebody else's idea instead of what the book's presenting, right? And so what happens with this is on page 40 here, we somewhere along the line, we present this idea like it's a behavioral problem. If I just go to meetings, if I have acceptance, if I do step one, if factor. And as long as factor, as long as I don't take the first drink, I'll be okay. Anybody hear that crap being peddled in AA? That's killing people. Or the idea, and this is starting to come back around again, that the obsession is one of the symptoms in alcoholism. Or the spiritual malady is one of the symptoms in alcoholism. It isn't. Nowhere in the book does it say it is. But people from treatment center, mainline speakers all say this thing, that this means the delusion that they talk about on page 62, right? 100 forms of self-delusion is the same as the insanity. It isn't. I can have a delusion based on incorrect information that I believe to be true that isn't true. Then I find out that when I did my fourth step, that a lot of these ideas I had were not based on actual things. So the clarity of being presented truth is like the allergy. I had the delusion I could drink like other people until I was presented the truth about the illness. And I concurred that I have it. The idea of me keeping myself sober based on events or circumstances or hitting bottom or really doing step one was presented differently when someone took me through this book. But until you get taken through what it says, you wouldn't know the difference, would you? Because a percentage of the people tell you contrary within our fellowship, yes or no? Yeah. How many people has Relapse chair gone to a meeting and been shamed and guilted in that meeting? Your people, thanks for going out for me. Thanks for doing more research. Thanks for the... People didn't tell me that. I was too batshit crazy. I'd put you right through a window tell me shit like that. Right? They tell other people that, right? So when we get here, and this guy here, and we'll finish with this idea, is that he talks about here. He says, he's telling him about his last relapse. He says, let him tell you about it. He's going to talk about his ideas around step one. And this is 90% of the people, even in this meeting, and 90% of the people in our fellowship. The idea has to be smashed. How do we smash certain ideas that we have? Is we have to learn what the actual ideas being presented. Where? In our literature, the common language. So let's see what happens with this guy. We're going to be about 5 more minutes here. Okay, let him tell you about it.
Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again.
So as soon as you say that, you haven't done step one. Yeah. There's a lot of people in our fellowship says, I'm never drinking again. Well, you just admitted you haven't done step one. Mm-hmm. Right? Because then who's your own solution if you believe that you're never drinking again? It's behavioral problem. Right? Without even realizing it's so subtle that self-reliance has just stepped in and you've convinced yourself, which is a form of delusion if you have this illness. So what needs to smash that idea is truth or another relapse or events or what we'll get into in a minute. So he's under the delusion, which is he's not suffering from insanity. He's suffering from incorrect information and the inability to correctly diagnose himself. Mm-hmm. Yes? No?
Yeah.
Anybody following me here? Yes? Okay, go ahead.
It wouldn't be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink.
Not the obsession, the insanity. Can't see, feel, and touch it. Blank spot, phenomena, malady.
But I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned.
And you hear people talk about that in the fellowship. It's a behavioral problem. As long as I'm not selfish and considerate, dishonest, I won't get drunk again because these are the things that get you drunk. Then none of us would be sober if that was the stuff that get you drunk, would it? How many people would still be drunk here if it was based on you being inconsiderate and selfish? Including me, I'm in there. Right? So we see there's more. The human dilemma is a little different than alcoholism, right? I know it's hard to believe, but I still suffer from me every once in a while. I know I'm just as shocked as you people are. Go ahead.
I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows.
I don't have the malady. And I'll be able to see it forecasted in the future. Because I understand it now. I have a behavioral problem. I'll be able to see it. I don't have an illness. Okay, go ahead.
That I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men had failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard.
How many people hear that in meetings? Just don't take the first one. We stay sober under any and all conditions. That gives you the false hope or the idea, being a new person, that you should be able to conquer this thing. You're already off to a bad start, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
So who's creating the delusion? Is the actual fellowship that you come in looking for help from. We started bullshitting you before you even realize it.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't realize they're bullshitting you either because they don't understand it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're different from us. But those of us who understand go, we know you're in trouble and we're going to start working with you and we're not going to ask your permission to do so. You showing up in a meeting was you giving me permission to start working with you. And I don't care if you like me. Most of the people who loved me the most started with people who didn't like me. Put your hand down, Katie. Okay, go ahead.
Now I don't know where I was. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time, all went well.
So here, now 41, let's go over. And he talks about the baffling feature of alcoholism, right? So here he's going to talk about, as soon as I regained my ability to think. How many people have been there? How many people relapsed here and went over your ability to think and try to tie an excuse to their last relapse? As soon as you tie an excuse to your last relapse, what you're saying is I have conditional sobriety based on this condition, that condition, this condition. That I'm not really beyond human aid is because of this. That's why I relapse. But the truth is it's going to happen again regardless of the condition. Being happy, joyous, and free, or miserable and discontented. Right? Remember the one guy, not a care on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're watching out for these things that get you loaded, guess what? Breathing is one of them. Okay, go ahead. So he's going to explain something that was never going to happen again that we should all understand. Go ahead.
As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time, I had not thought of the consequences at all. I commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again.
You notice they said that again, if I had an alcoholic mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, as long as I have an alcoholic mind, I will continue to drink again. And how many people got a pen and paper beside them? So once I go through this course of action and I have a psychic change or spiritual experience, 2 questions. Do I still suffer from alcoholism? Yes or no? And 2, do I still have an alcoholic mind? Yes or no? Everybody answer that? First questions that came to your mind. How many people said yes to the first question? Do I still suffer from alcoholism once I have a psychic change or spiritual experience? How many people said yes? How many people not getting involved? The answer is no. I don't still suffer from alcoholism once I have a psychic change or spiritual experience. What I go into is a daily reprieve. So, once I have a psychic change as the result of this course of action, do I still have an alcoholic mind? Yes or no? How many people said yes? How many people not getting involved? Come on, be honest. Okay. Right? And how many people said no? The no's have it. Because if I have an alcoholic mind, I'm going to drink again. Right? The purpose of the course of action is to create a psychic change or spiritual experience where the problem is removed. So my reliance is not on me to keep me sober. It's on my relationship with a power greater than self that I got through a course of action. Where did I get that course of action? It was through this literature that I've put into practice over 32 years now. I've been in AA since 1978. I've been sober as the result of this course of action and the information in it, in the application of it, since 1989. So what's the difference? This is the difference that this guy's talking about. Go ahead.
I don't remember where. Okay. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink.
One day. Who knows? Right?
Mm-hmm. Well, just that did happen, and more. For what I'd learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all.
Shit. That's the shit factor right there. Shit. Just spent $30,000 on treatment. Shit. Go ahead.
I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind.
There, they said it again. It must be important, right? How many times in this book do they say an alcoholic mind? This condition, this illness, this malady, this thing, this phenomena, this thing that parallels with my sound thinking, this dark matter, whatever you want to call it. It's there. I can't see, feel, and touch it. This is what it looks like. And when it happens, I'm working on another 24-hour chip without even realizing it. Most of us are not working on a 1-year chip. Most of us are working on a 24-hour chip even after getting a 1-year chip. That's what it's saying. It's just a matter of time. Go ahead.
I knew from that moment I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots.
Step 1, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? How many people? I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. Right? It took him a long time to get to this point, right? He's not the same guy he was on page 40, is he? He's getting into doing step 1 here. Mm-hmm. He admitted he had a problem before, which most of us do. I got a problem, but I can still be my own solution because I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm still, that's the obsession they talk about on page 23. Mm-hmm. Right? That we'll rise from our lethargy and exert our self-will. That's the first obsession, is that we could be our own solution. Listen to anybody coming back. How many people come back here and you're telling everybody what you're going to do different this time? You're telling us your solution to a problem you haven't... Anyways, you get what I'm saying there? It's funny, right? Listen to new people. They're still obsessed with the idea that they can fix themselves based on self. Have they done step 1 yet? No. Because step 1 is, I'm in trouble, what do I got to do? Which is a big difference, right? So this is what he's getting there. Go ahead.
Would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much.
Yeah, we don't like that shit, do we? Go ahead.
And they asked if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions.
Concede, the terminology again. Concede is very important here. The language, we can't change the language because it's very specific in the building blocks. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that model concedes this kind of glue, this thing to keep it together. Not any kind of glue. It's this specific glue that goes with this model to get the same thing that they're talking about. This is part of the process. This is the first step in recovery. What is? The conceding, the delusion that we're like other people at present maybe has to be smashed. Go ahead.
They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself.
There you go. So both ideas are smashed here now, right? Go ahead.
They then outlined the spiritual answer and program of action which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had only been a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow.
He's understanding what's being presented here. He has to understand the solution as being presented by those who put this together. When you're new going through, you need to understand what the book's talking about in regards to this solution. Right? Because you need, okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I understand. So, no, that's not hard. That's what he's kind of saying here. I see what's being happening. I've gone through the rest of this. I've read through it. I see the course of action you guys took. Okay, this not, like, I could digest some of this stuff. I can see it's possible for me to do this. Go ahead.
But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic.
Which is steps 3 to 12, right? 3 to 11, 3 to 12. We understand what this course of action is. I need to do this in order to have it, which is step 2. Right? Yes, no? So step 2 is about the course of action as the solution being presented to access this power, right, which will create the change in the form of psychic change or spiritual experience. So what's the first thing that happens? Is my relationship with this power or a psychic change or spiritual experience?
Relationship.
The relationship. How do I get this relationship? That's what this book is about. So anybody who does this course of action will get that relationship, this experience. A lot of people have knowledge of certain things or could talk about other people's experience with these things, but your own experiences of these things is required in order for you to recover from this thing. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy, but the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems.
There you go. So what they're saying is what Bill talked about is he has a solution for his human condition that he used to treat with alcohol. And it stopped working somewhere along the line, but he couldn't stop applying that thing. So he had found a more sufficient solution to his human dilemma. He doesn't apply the solution to his alcoholism. He applies it to his human problem, and the alcoholism problem gets removed. Because we agree in step 1 that we're not equipped to deal with alcoholism. If I could apply certain principles and ideas to alcoholism, then I wouldn't be powerless over it, would I? And as long as it's present, I'll continue to drink. So I need to find a formula to remove it. And I'll close with this idea. When I have a headache, I'll take a couple aspirin or a Tylenol to remove the headache. Doesn't mean I have an aspirin deficiency or Tylenol deficiency that caused the problem. The problem is something caused the problem, and I was able to apply these remedies from my doctor to this problem that removed the problem. That's the same like the spiritual solution that we have is not because it's created by the spiritual problem. The solution that is applied removes the problem. Is that pretty wild? And so we'll close with this idea. Here, everybody go to the first page of the book. It talks about here, is this here, Alcoholics Anonymous. Everybody see this first page here? Alcoholics Anonymous? Mm-hmm. The story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. If you want what we have in your life, you need to do what we did. And how do you know if you did it? You can show somebody else how to do it using our basic text with the terminology and language as outlined by the first 100 men and women. It's important. It's not interpretive dance. It's not Burger King sobriety. You can't have it your way. It's very specific in the wording, terminology, and outline. Mm-hmm. If you're substituting stuff, then you're messing with a recipe that has the potential of really... I'm not going to say what I actually want to say, but all I know is that when this thing was incorporated in my life, it not only changed my life, changed everybody's life around me. Just like when I was afflicted with alcoholism, it changed everybody's life around me. And the solution with one man with this book in hand enabled me to duplicate with such backing what they experienced that I experienced without anything. I'm amazed with the story I have in my life today, because it's the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's available to anybody willing to go through this course of action. So this week we did step 2. Read through more of We Agnostics, right? And next week we're going to look at step 3. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Awesome.
Thanks very much, Tony and Katie. Appreciate it. The seventh tradition.